We'll try to have an overview here, a high-level overview with some links so you can delve deeper, or we can reference later on. And then we will have some insight, some initial insight of the main, let's say, proposal editors, which was K3Y, on what they thought when writing this expansion of across. So without further ado, let me start this presentation with the introduction of what we aim to be an across, let's say, a predecessor of, aimed to be a predecessor of 6G-OPTICON. And maybe at the end of this presentation, we have to see how we'll transition from this left side across project to the right side of the arrow. So a brief introduction. Across was an SNS Call 1 Stream A project. So it finished on time on December 2025, and it had a successful review. It had 2 interim reviews. No major comments were actually handed over during these reviews. It passed with flight colors, and this is the reason that we stress a bit this importance of getting to know what across did. You may find additional materials in the site of the project and fully updated YouTube channel, which it hosted the artifacts of the project. And the artifacts of the project being the validation artifacts being test cases, which is the same thing with 6G-OPTICON. I think it's nice to have, let's say, an aggregated place or dissemination channel, which was YouTube at the context of across. I think we can have an aim to have a similar approach in 6G-OPTICON, and of course the LinkedIn channel of across is also available, but I think EBOS will do an even better job at this stage. So the timeline of across was that it started at 2023. It had, the typical, the first year is a typical requirements gathering phase, the initialization of how we will deploy the integration, the overall integration framework, and the definition of the test cases, which served as a validation means of the project. The second year had the deployment of the integration framework, or let's say the initial testbed setup, and then we saw any gaps in the test cases that we wanted to address, and we started the first test cycle following the completion of the development cycle of the testbeds or the overall platform at exactly mid-project. It was month 18. So the final year was let's say, an iterative test case deployment, and also a second development cycle, which it included any gaps that we find that the deployed platform could not address during the execution of the first phase of the test cases. So we had a second development cycle of the platform. Of course, not heavy development was made, but rather additions. And then we have the final testing cycle, which we deployed and recorded the final test cases. And last but not least, we have elected an SDO to demonstrate the major, let's say, test case family. So we had, let's say, a review, a final review, just before the final review of the project. So the across vision was based on the service orchestration landscape. So we started with saying that, of course, we acknowledge the orchestration platforms existed before across as well, but mainly the human was governing the orchestrator, and the orchestrator would need to monitor things and reason these things, actually not reason, monitor things, and the human would reason over this monitoring data, and then command the orchestrator to reactively actuate on the continuum that the orchestrator would acknowledge. In terms of, let's say, literature, we can say that on autonomy level, on autonomy levels, it was around level 2, which was partial autonomy, mainly executed on human intervention. And after across the envisioned, let's say, goal was that the human will be an observer, or at least at at, maximum let's say level that we could achieve it, and the orchestrator have closed loops that would monitor things. The intelligence layer would try to reason, and the automation layer would offer a decision that would translate to an orchestrator command. So from reactive actuation, we tried to migrate towards proactive actuation. Of course, tackling the security and trust aspects as we had to expand through multiple domains and testbeds. So the ambition was to go from level 2 towards tackling, I would say, level 4 autonomy, of course, not fully autonomous interaction. And maybe this is, let's say, the part that 6G-Opticon comes along since AI matured enough, since across, and also since the proposal writing of 6G-Opticon. So maybe 6G-Opticon is a place to try to transition towards aspects of level 5 autonomy.